Welcome to this episode of the Smart Leaders Sell podcast. I'm Jess Kaler, sales coach and leadership expert, and I am really excited to dig down into today's episode. Okay, guys, I am super excited to introduce you to, I've got to be honest, one of my favorite secret people to follow on the internet, because I've been following this person for a really long time. I was introduced to them by one of my biz besties, Tara Newman, about 2.5, 3 years ago. And I followed her journey right from way back when she first ever started out. So welcome, Sarah Kaler. I'm excited to have you here.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
I'm really excited about this because you are somebody who also comes from a corporate background, and I want to dig into that later on. And you kind of made big waves when you started out online and taking a stand for certain things around self-care and making sure that you balance your business and your life. So can you just tell everybody a little bit about what it is that you actually do?
Sure, a lot of things. I think fundamentally what I do is I'm an executive coach, a leadership consultant, a business consultant. I think my company, we do culture advisory, and in big companies, we do business consulting with small to mid-size companies. And then we're coaching everything from the first time female founder to the CEO who's running the $100 million company to the Fortune 500 executive and C-suite leader. So we're working with leaders at all levels and high performance teams, essentially to grow and scale high performance, holistic, conscious companies that are really making an impact and creating high performance environments that can really root and grow.
I think that's really interesting, because I think a lot of what we see in the online space tends to be people, they maybe go out, they set up a business, and they're looking ultimately to work with people one-to-one, but they don't really see how it might end up scaling in terms of them becoming the founder of a business that is fairly large. I think that's quite a significant impact in the world now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I never set out to be an online business, so to speak. I see it as, and I would say this, I can speak on behalf of my team as well, that we see the online space as a distribution channel, right? It's part of how we do business and where we do business, but it's not all of where we do business. So we have a lot of different vehicles and audiences and spaces where we're making an impact and we're serving, right? We're serving leaders and teams and companies, and where we get to do our best work and really lead at our highest level.
That's so exciting. And I love that you've called it distribution network, because I think people get really hung up on this idea that, oh my goodness, if I'm not on Instagram, I'm not going to make money. Or if I'm not in a Facebook group, I'm not going to make money, right? And I know that you and I are both kind of smiling about this, thinking, yeah, okay, cool, because we've been there and done it. But at the same time, when people do first start out, everybody's got their own opinion on where you have to be. And I think when you phrase it as something like distribution network rather than social media and where you're going to get your leads, actually it's a lot easier for people to figure out where they want to start.
Yeah, I love that, because I think, at Soul Powered, we have explored it all. We've done the Facebook group, we've done all the social media, we've done the Facebook Lives when that was hot, and then we've done the typical business development offline, right? That, most people from the traditional business world would know in terms of prospecting and pipelining and all of that, and the sales cycle. And I would say that in the online space, you have to do what feels good to you, where your strengths lies, but also what is an intersection with your audience, right? What works for your audience? Where are they interacting? Where are they living? But where's that conversation alive? Where they, we hear this, where are they hanging out, right? in marketing. And yet for us, we really explored, we kind of dabbled in a lot of things. And at the end of the day, I think you have to know where your strengths are as a leader or a team or an individual, to know where are you, one, intrinsically motivated, where are you in your high performance zone, where are you effective, right? Where are you efficient? Where are you able to deliver results, even in a day-to-day conversation, right? Not just in delivering the ultimate outcome for your product or service, so that that you can say, oh, well, it's Instagram, or it's it's a story that I need to tell today on this platform, or it's it's all video. I mean, it's different for everyone, and there isn't one way. And I know for us, there's been chapters to our story as a business and a company, where there was maybe 1 year where we committed to really high-end video, and we spent all of our budget, and we have a video team we work with, where we just really invested hardcore into video production. And literally on the back end, we were storyboarding, it was lots of months of planning, and then bringing that into full execution and bringing those videos to life. And I'm not talking about lives and in the moment streaming, but really well produced video. And that was a big part of our strategy, right? But that was 1 year, right? That wasn't, oh, we do that every year. And that doesn't mean we won't do it again. But I think you have to be on your toes, and you have to say, what do my, people, my audience, my prospects need from me right now? And you have to be willing to innovate. You have to be willing to take risks. And you have to, I think, ultimately be listening.
I completely agree. And I think there are so many things there that I'm like, oh my goodness, I want to ask this next or that next. But I'm going to I'm going to go down this route, because it's that idea of conversation that I think is so interesting. Because I think one of the things that it can be really exciting about the idea of social media is that you have this instantaneous ability to be able to do market research. And so you can put a post out there and you can find out exactly what people say they want within minutes. The difficulty, I think, is that sometimes this conversation isn't a two-way street. Sometimes what's happening is people are going out there and they're looking for people to validate their answer on social media.
That's right.
Rather than listening to what's coming back and then going ahead and creating in that way. Mm-hmm. And I think that leads us into this idea that, really it can be hard as a business owner to stay in your own lane. And that's one of the things that you've done really well, despite the fact that you've done lots of experimentation with different areas, in terms of where you're promoting or the content you're creating. But how can people stay in their own lane whilst having that, I guess, unbiased conversation?
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you brought this up, because I was actually thinking about this before we hopped on today. I was thinking about focus groups, and this is directly tied to your question about market research. So I think a big part of staying in your own lane is literally coming from I'm going to call it a North Star, or a focus of knowing that you carry implicit bias. You just used this, right? You just said bias, right? We all have this motivation inside of us that says, it's an attachment. I have this idea. It's brilliant, right? We think our ideas are so great, or our product or service, or the next thing we want to do. And ultimately, we're biased, right? We're biased about the product or service. We're biased about how we think people are going to receive it, and what they need, or their pain, or the vision they're buying into. And the reality is, we need to get related. We need to get in relationship to the people that we are here to serve. And the only way to do that is to become customer centric, where everything that you do is about serving them, becoming them, relating to them, knowing what they need before they even know what they need themselves. And the only way to do that is to get so integrated with that human being, right? And to do that, you have to spend an enormous amount of time with those people and understand their psychology, their lives, how they're feeling, how they emote, how they, how they think, how they live, how they breathe, right? And even how they're, what they're triggered by. I mean, we talk a lot about pain in marketing, but it's beyond that. It's the going 10 levels deeper into the belief system and what's really motivating them, causing them to act or not act, and spending the time and the commitment to do that work. And I mentioned focus groups because we have been really, even from day one at Soul Power, really relentlessly committed to being customer centric and really being, I'm going to use the word agnostic. And what I mean by that is not coming from the expert position of we know best, right? Or we have the only methodology that matters, but instead saying, what do they know and what do we need to learn from them? Because they actually know best and we're here to serve them. And there's a million, experts and methodologies and systems and frameworks out in the world that are beautiful and that actually serve, and we can braid them together and integrate them even with our own intellectual property, right? And we can serve as leaders in that system and welcome it and collaborate with it, right? But in order to do that and do that well, you actually have to come from a collaborative place and you actually have to be listening, right? And be willing to create the seat for that to happen.
And that can be quite uncomfortable because I think sometimes when we open the conversation, I was talking to a group of masterminders a few weeks about this. When you ask for feedback, I think sometimes we can get the line a little bit blurred between wanting people to say, that's really good, everything you do is amazing, and we love it. And get a bit confused when people turn around and say, hey, I think this could be improved, or actually, I feel like you could have talked better here to what my problem was. And so I think, there is a kind of expectation certainly in the online world that I don't think is as prevalent in the brick and mortar space, that feedback is bad or that feedback is negative, as opposed to looking at it constructively and using that to go on and create the very best that they can to serve that particular customer.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think there's this idea that you have to be right. And if you don't have the answer, right, and especially in the online industry, you need to be the expert. You need to know the answer. You need to provide it, or people won't trust you. And that's false, right? It is false. Yes, you need to have credibility and the ability to create trust. But what builds trust with people is not just being the all-knowing, right? In fact, that can be, as we all know, be extremely egocentric and off-putting. Being vulnerable and courageous and open-minded and collaborative, these things build trust.
That's really interesting because both you and I have worked with some of the world's arguably biggest brands. I've worked with some of the world's largest fashion brands, like luxury fashion brands, as few. And one of the things that I think there's always this expectation that in corporate, the ego is the center of everything that happens. I know from working in sales teams that everyone's like, oh, salespeople are so arrogant and there's such a big ego driving this. But the reality is actually very different. I think, yes, you're always going to get the person on the sales floor who is I'm the big I am and I'm the top biller and whatever.
That.
But everything is driven by the relationship they have with that customer and listening and being prepared to, I think, eat humble pie sometimes when you don't get it right. And it's one of the easiest ways to be successful in the corporate space is to be transparent about that. How can we make it better? Right. And the idea of that constant feedback loop.
Yeah, absolutely. There has to be that constant loop. And that, even as someone who maybe has a 20-year career or, even 30 years in an industry, the only way to continue to get better is to have feedback, right? To continue to be in a growth mindset. And if you're not growing, you're stagnating, and at best you're mediocre, right? At best. And so we have to have that level of input to be able to get better and to stay relevant. And I mean, we could have a whole conversation in itself about how quickly things are moving in the pace of the business world today, right? Not to mention the integration of technology and where things are headed. And so we need it. We can't sit in assumption that we actually know because we were at the top of our game 5 years ago.
And that's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think one of the kind of concepts that you've raised there is adapt or die.
That's right. That's right.
Way. But it's true. Yeah. I think that's one of the things that we see often in the brick and mortar world. We see this really kind of black and white attitude to either we move forward and we use the feedback and we adapt and change and survive and thrive, or we ignore it. And like Blockbuster and many other companies that kind of ignored the whole technology boom, they're gone, and then they are non-existent now. I mean, I was saying to somebody the other day, I cannot believe that there are children who will grow up having never experienced the pain of having to go to a video store to rent a video, and if somebody else has already rented it, you can't watch it. Like,
that's right.
That blows your mind now. But they were one of the companies that said, we don't care. We don't care about technology. We're not looking to adapt. We're going to be just fine. We have our customer base. And they didn't listen to that feedback loop. They didn't take the warning at all. They didn't take that on board. And I think now we are in an economically challenging time because things are changing. And it means that arguably there are lots of things we can't predict in the same way that maybe we could have done in 2015 when people were bringing out, oh, well, look, here's a new platform, here's Periscope, here's this, here's that. Go and be an early adopter and those things will be successful. It's now much harder to do because we're not shopping around necessarily on price anymore. We're shopping based on quality and credibility and authority. And that's much more difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would add to that time. Right? Time is our biggest asset, regardless of who you are. And it's so valuable that people want to know, will you save me time? Will this save me time? Right? Whether it's you, your product, your technology, your service, right? Not just will you get me the result, but will you save me time?
And that's the interesting thing. I mean, when we started talking at the beginning of the show, I mentioned this idea of balance. And that's something that you are a huge advocate of. And again, because time is this non-renewable source, balance is really important. And I think sometimes it can be easy for people to justify that they are busy. They're too busy to make time for themselves, or they're too busy to make time to hire the team and train them. What would you say about that?
Well, I have a lot to say about it. I think, like, how long do we have? I think, the too busy thing, it is a bit of an epidemic, right? It is a mindset. And I think that the thing that I want people listening to really ask themselves, especially if they haven't hit a wall or a rock bottom moment, right? A tipping point of sorts. And I preface it with that because the people who've hit a wall or a rock bottom or a major, trigger moment, those people, they have motivation to create behavior change. They have a wake up call of sorts to say, this isn't working for me anymore. Even if they're still working on it, they're in the practice of creating that change. But for those of us who are saying, I'm busy, I don't have time for this, or, that sounds nice, but, right? And that's a lot of us. Most of us do it in some form every day, 100 times a day.
I'm sat here feeling guilty about it.
Right? And we don't have to feel guilty as part of our humanity. And, right? And we are very privileged in the sense that we have the opportunity to not have to hit rock bottom. I often spend a lot of time thinking about, why do we wait? Why do we wait for the crisis to come to create the life and the leadership and the team and the business and the opportunities that we really want? Why not start now?
I love that. And that's
Right.
really interesting, because I think the natural knee-jerk reaction for a lot of people is, because it's not all sorted. I don't have the plan. I don't know how it's going
I
to work
don't know
out.
how.
Yes.
Right. That's
And
the
we all
one.
want like that guarantee that it's always going to be fine. And I think that's the same way when you jump to any level in business, whether you're just starting out, whether you're hiring a new mentor, whether you're, moving from like the 6-figure point to the 7, like it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah.
There's always that feeling of, well, I don't know how it's going to happen. I can't see it. And so people continue in like this comfort zone
That's right.
until they hit
Coasting. It's coasting. And really ambitious, smart, competent people coast because they
Mhm.
can. They can get away with it. And it's okay. It's kind of cozy there, right?
Mhm.
Until something happens, right? Whether it's in a relationship, it's with your health, it's with your business. Maybe you're flatlined for 3 years, right? You don't comp. You're going, what's going on? Or that new technology comes out. There's 5 new competitors, and suddenly you're Blockbuster,
Yeah.
right? And you think, wait a second, you know, I'm not I'm not so relevant anymore. Or, I can't keep up this pace, or the classic stress epidemic is hitting, left, right, and center for most people. And then they start to question time, right? Because they start to see the not only worthiness of it, but the cost, right?
Mhm.
The cost that's incurring and compounding as they stagnate and they don't make a new conscious choice to choose a new direction, a new path for themselves.
And it's almost that lack of decision that puts them there. Like that's what effectively helps people, I think, hit the wall, because when you are in that position of coasting and you're thinking, well, revenue's doing fine, or it's not great but it's not bad, unless something really does happen where you are forced to make that decision, that indecision just kind of keeps you there. It keeps you stuck, and it throws you up against the problem in a bigger way because you've done nothing to rectify it to that point.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We are, I think as humans, we are not taught, as kids all the way into our adulthood, we're not taught to build strength and resiliency to adapt to change, right? We're not, because the waves keep coming, right? The waves of uncertainty. And that's what we're talking about here, right? Moving into the unknown and uncertainty and being able to walk into that full throttle and with fierceness, with confidence, knowing that you are worth it, that you are talented, that you could lead at your highest level, love with all your might, show up with all your talent, and contribute to the world and make a huge impact in all areas of your life. And know not only that you are worth it, but it is your responsibility, right? And there's not just reward for the world, but everything that you desire and you deserve is going to show up for you and then some in that journey
Yeah.
when you decide, right? The thing that if you look at the Latin root of the word decide, it's actually about cutting off. And what's so cool about that is that when you make a decision, you're actually letting go of what no longer serves you. And you're choosing to move forward with what does.
And this is really interesting because a few minutes ago you talked about this idea of relevancy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a big piece of decision making. And certainly when it comes to social media, cutting things off sometimes, because I think people look for relevancy as being, how accessible am I? Can everybody see me at all times? Am I keeping them updated? As opposed to, am I producing content that positions me in the best way to be an authority in my industry and show people how I can serve them in a genuine way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would just add to that, there's a lot of pressure, right?
Yeah.
To do all the things
Yeah.
and to be everywhere, right? And so, so you have to make the decision, where am I going to be right now? And right now, in the present moment, although that might serve your short-term strategic plan and your long-term vision and strategy simultaneously, doesn't mean that's where you're going to stay forever. It's just where you are right now, right? And being able to strengthen that muscle of thinking in the short term in a way that serves your long term simultaneously, but also having the big picture perspective to know that what you do right now isn't necessarily a forever. In fact, it's a form of temporary, and it might be a high impact temporary that's meaningful and gets you results and serves, but it doesn't mean you have to do it forever, right? And you might even love it, but it doesn't mean it's forever, and probably shouldn't be, because as you said, if you're not evolving, you're probably dying, right? Right? And this is really important in the business world. It's really, really important, not to mention our own personal growth.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's really interesting because I think what's probably most interesting to me is when we look at the arc, particularly with online entrepreneurs, they tend to start out in two ways. You know, they start out and they're either in all the Facebook groups and they're soaking up advice, and then they're in other Facebook groups and they're pushing out their own value and trying to sell, or they are connecting with an existing network and they're leveraging that network to build good relationships, to build good connections. And then what happens is we see this kind of trajectory of, they post more on social media and they become omnipresent almost across every single platform. And they use that generally to get to about the 6-figure mark. And then when that happens, they're like, oh my God, this is, wow, I'm done. Like, I am just done with that.
Yeah, burnt.
And then they come back and then they streamline and they perhaps go, okay, right, I'm going to be only present on one platform and have one content medium, and they start to specialize. And I think that's so interesting. And I'm wondering whether it's a rite of passage, whether it's something that everybody has to go through to just realize where they really want to sit and feel out all of the areas and feel out what works best for them, or whether it's something that we think should happen and therefore we do it.
Well, my personal perspective is that most people do that because they're watching what other people do and then they follow, right? They're following as members of the crowd. For me, I say if everyone's going right, go left. That's my personal perspective, not because I'm just rebellious and I, want to, tell you to go rogue. I think most people have not developed, and this isn't just to be critical, I just think most people have not paused and asked themselves to develop critical thinking skills in this space, right? They're going with the crowd because they think, wow, there's a lot happening here. And well, if that's what people are doing, it must be working. And the truth is, for a lot of people, it's not, right? So there's this sort of herd mentality where people just start doing what other people are doing. And if you think for yourself, and if you ask critical questions, right? Like it's like we were talking about before, go to your people, be customer centric. Don't just follow other people because you think that's what is just going to work for everyone, right? I mean, that's crazy. I mean, you wouldn't do, I mean, if you take that out of context and you think, athletic training or parenthood or, any other thing, would you just parent your children like every other parent because you you witnessed that? Well, no, you would do what your child needed,
Yeah.
right? Or, if you were a triathlete, would you just watch a bunch of athletes train and then do what they needed? No, you would do what your body needed for your needs, right? And your timing and your goals and your set of experiences. And, I mean, you wouldn't just try to be the professional if you were amateur, right? I mean, there's certain things that you need to take into consideration. I mean, there's thinking critically about it. And a lot of people, they just jump into the mass, the herd, head down, and they don't think too critically about it. So I think it's really, really essential that people use that lens and that filter to weed out some of these things, because one, you can save a lot of time. We'll bring it back to time and energy, and start to understand right away, what is your ROI? What is the ROI on your time and where you're spending it, whether it's a marketing activity or a sales activity or a relationship building activity. And I'm not just talking about financial ROI, which, yes, let's please know that. But let's also talk about physical ROI, mental ROI, energetic ROI. Let's know this. Let's tap into it. Groups and all that stuff. I mean, there's so much wasted time and energy. And sure, you could be learning through observation and building some key relationships. I'm not going to take the value away from especially the relationship building part, but for sure, for a lot of people, they don't need to be in some of those places.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting how regularly perhaps we need to monitor that. One of the things that I was saying on the podcast back in December was that for 2019, I was like, I'm culling Facebook. I just don't want to be on there. And every day when I wake up and I'm scrolling through the feed, and the first thing I see is, you need to be better at this. And here's how you can be more perfect. And here's what's wrong with you. And that actually doesn't help anyone. It's not useful, and we're disguising it as this value driven exercise, and really it's not. It's a sales exercise for some people, and it's a completely comparative exercise for others, and that's not benefiting anybody. But I think it can be interesting to look at, every 3 months, is it worth reassessing where you're spending your time, what your ROI is in terms of those finances, in terms of your learning and development, in terms of how you're building your brand, your visibility, like all those kinds of things, just so that you're not being caught up accidentally in the herd. Because I think a lot of people do. They have this accidental, oh, well, I'm going along and nothing bad is happening. Yeah. So I'll just keep doing that. And before you know it, you've stopped being a leader, you've stopped innovating. And you are just kind of caught up in this, okay, well, we're doing this and this is what's happening in the world, so I'm just going to go along. And again, we come back to that idea of coasting. We're going to coast because it's easy.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think you have to look at where you're spending your time and against your vision and your goals, and say, does this ladder up, right? Yeah. If I want to, leapfrog above the pack, are the activities that I'm spending my time investing in actually yield that result?
That's so powerful. That's such an interesting question to ask yourself, as, if you ask somebody who's thinking about being a leader, what are you doing that is making you lead? Yeah. That's really interesting. Thank you so much. Seriously, I'm like, I could talk to you all day. I'm like, this is just so interesting. And it's one of those things where I think sometimes we don't elevate the conversations that we participate in. And that holds a lot of people back, because I think, one of the relics from my corporate days, I remember walking into my first meeting and being like, I don't know what any of this means. And I don't know how to participate in this conversation. And it makes me feel like I can't add value. Mm-hmm. And actually, the more you do participate, the quicker your trajectory for learning is, but also the quicker you take off, because you become like the sponge that is listening to all of the stuff that's more advanced, and you just move forward with that mentality immediately rather than staying around in the soup.
Absolutely. 100% agree.
Thank you. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing that. Like, seriously, elevating the conversation is epic. Where can people find you if they're interested in finding out more about how they can lead in a soul-powered way? Where can they find you and how can they start that conversation with you?
Absolutely. So, number one place you can find me and my team is at soulpowered.com. You can reach us there anytime. And on social media, our handle is at @BeSoulPowered.
I love that. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And guys, if you've enjoyed this episode, please make sure that you do hit us up on some social platform and let us know what your key takeaway was, because it's always nice to know where we've hit the spot and what you've really taken away. Thank you so much for your time, and we will see you again in the next episode on Monday. Have an awesome weekend.